The radio crackled to life at 5:47 hours, and every controller in the tower at Bagram Airfield went silent. The voice on the other end wasn't asking for priority landing. It wasn't declaring an emergency. It was stating a fact, delivered with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who has already accepted what might happen next. Bagram Tower, this is Hog 2-1. Single ship, combat effective, hydraulics failing, right engine shredded, fuel state critical. Requesting straighten approach, runway 03. The tower chief leaned forward, his hand frozen above the transmit button. Hog 2-1. The call sign had been listed as missing for 6 hours. The entire package had returned at dawn, shot up and battered, but they'd come back, all except one. The pilot of Hog 2-1 had stayed behind, alone in the mountains where the Taliban owned the ridgelines and the sky belonged to no one. Now she was back, and from the sound of it, barely. The controller's voice cracked slightly as he replied. Hog 2-1, Bagram Tower, you're cleared direct. Emergency equipment standing by. Say souls on board and fuel remaining. There was a pause just long enough for the static to hiss through the silence. Then the voice returned, quieter this time, almost conversational. One soul, maybe 12 minutes of fuel, and tower, she's flying like she's tired, real tired. Outside, the sky was beginning to brighten along the eastern ridges, streaks of pale orange cutting through the bruised violet of pre-dawn. Maintenance crews stopped mid-step, eyes turning toward the southern approach corridor. Flight ops personnel spilled out onto the ramp, faces grim, arms crossed. Nobody said it, but everyone knew. 12 minutes of fuel in an A-10 with a dead engine and no hydraulics meant she was gliding on hope and muscle memory. It meant every second mattered. It meant she might not make it. The crash trucks rolled into position, their lights painting the tarmac in rotating red and white. Medics checked their kits. A chaplain appeared at the edge of the crowd, hands folded, head bowed. And then someone saw it. A dark speck against the lightning sky, low and slow, trailing a thin ribbon of smoke. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, ugly and beloved, limping home on one engine and a prayer. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't move. They just watched, breath held, as the aircraft descended toward the runway with all the grace of a wounded bird refusing to fall. The pilot inside that cockpit was Captain Myra Kovac, call sign Reaper, and 6 hours ago she had made a choice that no one expected her to survive. She had stayed behind when her wingman's aircraft took critical fire over a village in Kunar province, circling alone above a trapped Marine reconnaissance team while insurgents closed in from 3 sides. Her jet had taken hits. Her fuel had burned low. Her wingman had begged her to break off. She had refused. And now, as the wheels of her broken warthog kissed the concrete with a screech that echoed across Bagram, the question wasn't whether she had survived. It was how. The tower had gone quiet. The emergency crews held position, waiting. The A-10 rolled down the center line slower and slower, trailing sparks from a damaged landing gear, the right engine silent and scorched. It veered slightly left, corrected, veered again. And then, 3,000 feet down the runway, it stopped. For 5 full seconds, nothing happened. No movement, no radio call, just the hiss of cooling metal and the distant thrum of rotor blades from a medevac bird spinning up nearby. Then the canopy cracked open, slow and stiff, and a gloved hand emerged, gripping the rail. Myra Kovac pulled herself upright, her helmet still on, her visor dark. She didn't wave, didn't smile. She just sat there, perched on the edge of the cockpit, staring out at the crowd gathering along the taxiway. Her flight suit was stained with hydraulic fluid and sweat. Her oxygen mask dangled loose. And when she finally lifted her visor, her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. She keyed her radio one last time. Bagram Tower, Hog 2-1 is on deck. Aircraft is done. I'm good. The response came instantly, the controller's voice thick. Copy 2-1, welcome home. She didn't reply. She just nodded once, and began the slow climb down from the jet that had carried her through hell and refused to let her go. Myra had earned the call sign Reaper 3 years earlier, not because she was aggressive or reckless, but because she had an unnerving ability to stay calm in the worst situations. While other pilots went loud on the radio during contact, she went quiet. While others broke hard and fast, she turned slow and deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. Her weapons officer during her first combat deployment had said it best. She doesn't hunt. She just shows up and things die. The name stuck, but it also carried weight she never asked for. In a community of aviators where bravado and call signs were worn like badges, Reaper sounded cold, distant. It made her seem unapproachable, even among her own squadron. New pilots saw the name on the flight schedule and assumed she was hard. Old hands knew better, but they didn't correct the misconception. So Myra flew alone more often than not, preferred by leadership for the missions no one else wanted, respected from a distance but rarely included. She didn't mind. She had joined the Air Force to fly, not to be liked. But today, as she sat on the wing of her destroyed and watched the crowd approach, she realized something had shifted. The looks on their faces weren't the usual mix of indifference and professional courtesy. They were different, awake. The maintenance chief reached her first, a barrel-chested master sergeant named Torrance who had seen more combat aircraft than most pilots ever flew. He stopped at the base of the ladder, looked up at her and shook his head slowly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I've been turning wrenches on hogs for 16 years. I've never seen one this beat up make it home." Myra glanced back at the aircraft. The right engine cowling was shredded, exposing twisted metal and scorched components. The tail was pockmarked with bullet holes. The right aileron hung at an angle barely attached. Hydraulic fluid pooled beneath the fuselage in dark, spreading puddles. She exhaled, long and slow. "She wanted to come home," Torrance nodded. "And you brought her." The debrief started 90 minutes later in a windowless room that smelled like burnt coffee and old briefing packets. Myra sat at the head of a long table, still in her flight suit, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that had mostly come undone. Across from her sat the squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, a lean man with iron-gray hair and a reputation for running the tightest A-10 squadron in theater. To his right was the wing intelligence officer, Major Callahan, a sharp-eyed woman who never missed a detail. At the far end, a JAG officer sat with a legal pad, saying nothing. Hayes leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Walk me through it, Reaper, from the top." Myra nodded, her voice steady. "We were tasked with close air support for a Marine recon element operating near the village of Dar Akel. 8 Marines, dismounted, gathering intel on a suspected weapons cache. We checked in on station at 23:40 hours, 2-ship formation, full combat load. Situation was quiet. We were 10 minutes from rotating off station when the Marines took contact from the North Ridgeline." Callahan made a note. "How many shooters?" Initial estimate was 12 to 15 small arms and at least 2 PKM machine guns. The Marines were pinned in a dry wadi with minimal cover. They called for immediate close air support. Hayes didn't move. "And my wingman, Captain Elias Ruiz, call sign Dagger, took the first pass. 30mm gun run along the ridgeline, danger close. Effective. Suppressed the northern position. I followed with rockets on a secondary position to the east. We rolled in twice more, coordinating with the ground team, keeping the enemy off them while they displaced south toward Extract." Hayes leaned forward slightly. "That's textbook. So what happened?" Myra's jaw tightened. "Dagger took fire on his 4th pass. AAA, heavier than expected, probably a ZPU or DSK they'd kept hidden. Rounds punched through his left wing root and took out his hydraulics. He went emergency controllability, lost his flight controls." Myra's hands rested flat on the table, still and controlled, but her knuckles were white. "Dagger called for egress. I cleared him off target and took over the stack. He was trailing fluid, barely holding altitude. I told him to head straight for Bagram, full emergency, and I'd cover the Marines until the next package arrived." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "What was your fuel state?" 2,200 pounds. Enough for maybe 40 more minutes on station if I stayed efficient." "And the next CAS package?" Myra hesitated just a fraction of a second. "Delayed. Weather had socked in Kandahar. They estimated 30 minutes before wheels up, another 20 before they'd be on station." Callahan looked up sharply. "So you had a 50-minute gap with 2,200 pounds of gas?" "Yes, ma'am." Hayes exhaled through his nose. "Continue." Myra's voice didn't waver. "The Marines were still taking effective fire." They'd lost one KIA in the initial contact, 2 more wounded. They couldn't move without suppression. I made the call to stay. The JAG officer wrote something down. Hayes didn't blink. Alone, low on fuel, over hostile terrain at night. Yes, sir. And you didn't request clearance from TOC. It wasn't a question. Myra met his gaze. There wasn't time, sir. If I'd broken off, those Marines would have been overrun before the next package arrived. I assessed the risk and decided the mission required me to stay. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Hayes nodded slowly. Go on. Myra continued, her tone calm, methodical. I ran 6 more gun passes over the next 20 minutes, walking fire along the ridgeline and into a tree line where the enemy was attempting to flank from the west. I coordinated directly with the Marine team leader, call sign Phantom 16. He was talking me onto targets, adjusting fire, keeping me clear of their position. It was tight, real tight. Callahan leaned forward. How tight? Danger close doesn't cover it, ma'am. On 2 passes, I was firing within 30 meters of their position. Phantom 16 was calling corrections in real time. Left 20 down 10, send it. I sent it. Hayes's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or disbelief. And your fuel burned down fast. By the time I'd completed the 6th pass, I was at 800 pounds. That's when Dagger called on guard frequency. He'd made it back to Bagram, wheels down, safe. He told me to get out, said the Marines would have to hold until the next package. Myra paused, her jaw tight. I told him I wasn't leaving. The room went quiet. Hayes leaned back again, his voice softer now. What did he say? He said I was going to get myself killed. I told him that wasn't the plan. A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. He stopped arguing after that. Callahan's pen hovered above her notepad. What happened next? Myra's gaze dropped to the table. The enemy changed tactics. They stopped trying to flank and started massing for a direct assault. Phantom 16 estimated 20-plus fighters moving down from the ridgeline in a coordinated push. He said if they reached the wadi, it was over. Hayes's voice was almost a whisper. And your fuel? 400 pounds, maybe 10 minutes. Jesus. Myra looked up, her eyes hard. I made one more pass. Full gun run straight down the throat of their assault line. I held the trigger down until the cannon went silent, expended every round I had left. The Marines said it stopped them cold, bought enough time for extract birds to get inbound. Hayes stared at her. You went Winchester in a gun run at night over a valley you couldn't see out of. Yes, sir. With 400 pounds of fuel. Yes, sir. He shook his head slowly. How the hell did you make it back? Myra's voice softened, almost distant. I didn't think I would, sir. I'd burned too much gas, taken too many hits on the last pass. I felt the impacts, heard the alarms. Right engine started running rough about 2 minutes after I came off target. I knew I was in trouble. Callahan's voice was quiet. What did you do? I turned southwest, direct to Bagram. Pulled the throttles back as far as I could without flaming out, tried to stretch every pound of fuel. The right engine quit about 12 miles out. I secured it, feathered the prop, kept the left engine running just enough to maintain altitude. Hayes leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Single engine at night over the mountains. Yes, sir. I contacted Bagram Tower, declared the emergency, and started the approach. The hydraulics were failing by then. Stick felt like I was pushing through mud. I had to use both hands just to keep her level. The JAG officer stopped writing and just listened. I couldn't see the runway until I was almost on top of it. The moon was down, no ambient light, and my right generator had failed, so half my instruments were dark. I was flying on backup attitude indicator and airspeed. That's it. Hayes's voice was barely audible. And you landed, Myra nodded. I landed. Gear came down, but I'm not sure all 3 locked. The jet was shaking so hard I thought the wings were going to fold. I touched down long, maybe halfway down the runway, and the right main gear collapsed about 1,000 feet later. I rode it out on the nose gear and left main until she stopped. She paused, exhaling slowly. Then I shut everything down and climbed out. The room was silent. Hayes sat back, his arms uncrossing, his expression something close to awe. Reaper, he said quietly, you just described a mission that should have ended with a fireball in the Hindu Kush and a memorial service. Instead, you're sitting here telling me about it like you were flying a training sortie. Myra didn't smile. I didn't do anything special, sir. I just didn't quit. Callahan shook her head. Captain Kovac, you stayed on station alone at night with no backup, low on fuel and under fire. You expended every round you had and limped home on one engine with a jet that should have been unflyable. That's not quitting. That's something else. Myra looked at her, steady and calm. It's what we're supposed to do, ma'am. The Marines needed me. I stayed. That's the job. Hayes stood slowly and the others followed. He walked around the table and stopped beside her chair. For a moment he just looked at her, this young captain with tired eyes and hydraulic fluid still staining her sleeves. Then he extended his hand. I'm putting you in for a Silver Star, he said quietly. And I'm going to make damn sure everyone knows what you did out there tonight. Myra stood and shook his hand, her grip firm. Thank you, sir, but the real story is those Marines. They're the ones who fought through it. Hayes smiled faintly. We'll make sure they get theirs, but right now this is about you. He released her hand and stepped back. You're grounded for 72 hours, mandatory crew rest. After that, we'll talk about getting you back in the cockpit. Dismissed. Myra nodded, saluted, and turned toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Callahan's voice stopped her. Captain Kovac. Myra turned. Yes, ma'am. Callahan's expression was softer now, almost maternal. You know what you are, don't you? Myra frowned slightly. Ma'am, you're the reason the rest of us believe in this, in all of it. The mission, the oath, the idea that one person can make a difference. Callahan's voice didn't waver. Don't ever forget that. Myra held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. I won't, ma'am. And then she walked out, leaving the room in silence. Word spread fast. By the time Myra made it back to her quarters, the entire squadron knew. Pilots she'd flown with for months but barely spoken to stopped her in the hallways, nodding, offering quiet words. Hell of a night, Reaper. Good flying out there. Glad you made it back. She nodded in return, accepted the acknowledgments but didn't linger. She wasn't ready to talk about it yet, wasn't ready to process what had happened or what it meant. She just wanted to sleep. But sleep didn't come. She lay on her bunk in the dimly lit barracks, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The radio calls. The gun runs, the sound of the cannon tearing through the night, the silence when it ran dry, the alarms, the shaking, the long, slow descent toward a runway she couldn't see. Her hands were steady now, but they hadn't been in the cockpit. She'd been shaking the entire approach, adrenaline and exhaustion twisting together into something she couldn't name. She'd thought more than once that she wasn't going to make it. That the jet would quit, that the hydraulics would fail completely, that she'd run out of altitude and options and end up scattered across a mountainside with no one to know where she fell. But she hadn't. And now, lying in the dark, she didn't know what to do with that. Outside, the base hummed with the constant rhythm of war. Helicopters lifted off and returned. Trucks rolled past. Voices echoed across the flight line. Myra closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, grounding herself in the familiar noise. She was alive. The Marines were alive. That was enough. It had to be. 3 days later, Myra returned to the squadron-ready room for the morning brief. She walked in quietly, expecting the usual pre-flight chaos, pilots reviewing weather, maintenance arguing over deadlines, someone making bad coffee. Instead, she found the entire room standing. Every pilot, every crew chief, every scheduler and intel officer. They weren't talking. They weren't moving. They were just standing, facing the door, waiting for her. At the front of the room, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stood beside a large flat-screen monitor. On the screen was a grainy black and white image frozen mid-frame. Myra recognized it immediately. Gun camera footage, her footage. Hayes gestured toward an empty seat at the front. Captain Kovac, join us. Myra walked forward, her boots echoing in the silence, and sat down. Hayes picked up a remote and clicked play. The footage began to roll. The first few seconds showed the familiar sight of a night vision targeting pod view, the terrain below rendered in shades of gray and black. Then the camera shifted, and the village of Dar Akel appeared, small and angular, surrounded by ridgelines. Hayes's voice narrated, calm and clear. This is Reaper's fourth gun run. Time on target approximately 15 hours. Fuel state 1,200 pounds. Marines are in the wadi, center left of frame. Enemy positions are along the northern ridgeline, marked by thermal signatures. The footage showed the aircraft descending, the targeting reticle drifting across the ridgeline. Then the gun fired. The screen lit up with tracer fire, bright streaks pouring down onto the hillside. Impacts flashed along the ridgeline in rapid succession, dirt and rock exploding into the air. The camera held steady, tracking the fire, adjusting, walking the rounds across the enemy position with surgical precision. Then the aircraft pulled off target, climbing, and the footage cut to black. Hayes clicked to the next clip. This is the sixth run. Fuel state 800 pounds. Dagger has already egressed. Reaper is alone on station. This footage was shakier, the aircraft moving faster, the angle steeper. The targeting pod showed a tree line to the west, figures moving between the shadows. The reticle tracked them, adjusted, and the gun fired again. The rounds tore through the trees, splintering wood, sending bodies sprawling. The camera followed the fire, relentless, until the last tracer faded and the aircraft pulled away. Hayes paused the video. At this point, Phantom 16, the Marine team leader, reported that enemy fire had ceased on the western flank. The insurgents attempting to flank his position were neutralized. He clicked to the next clip. This is the final run. Fuel state 400 pounds. Enemy massing for direct assault. Reaper expended her remaining ammunition in a single pass. The footage showed the ridgeline again, but this time it was crawling with thermal signatures, dozens of them, moving downhill in a coordinated line. The targeting reticle centered on the mass, held steady, and the gun fired. The screen became a torrent of fire. Tracers poured down like rain, impacting the ridgeline in a continuous stream. The camera shook with the recoil, the image blurring, but the fire didn't stop. It kept coming, round after round, chewing through the assault line, tearing into the hillside until the ammunition counter hit zero and the gun went silent. The aircraft pulled off target, climbing hard, and the footage ended. The room was dead silent. Hayes turned off the monitor and faced the room. Phantom 16 sent a message this morning. He wanted me to read it to you. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it slowly. It says, "To the pilot of Hog 2-1. You saved 8 lives that night. You stayed when you didn't have to. You fired when no one else could. You gave us a chance when we had none. We will never forget what you did. Semper Fi, Phantom 16. Hayes folded the paper and looked directly at Myra. "Captain Kovac, your actions that night were extraordinary. You demonstrated courage, skill, and a commitment to the mission that defines what it means to be a combat aviator. On behalf of this squadron, this wing, and those Marines, thank you." The room erupted, not in cheers or applause, but in something deeper. A slow, steady rhythm of fists pounding on tables, boots stomping on the floor. It was the sound of respect, of recognition, of warriors acknowledging one of their own. Myra sat still, her throat tight, her eyes burning. She didn't trust herself to speak. Hayes stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've earned this, Reaper, all of it." She nodded, swallowing hard, and when she finally looked up, she saw faces she'd flown with for months, faces that had always been polite but distant, now looking at her with something she hadn't expected: pride. The pounding continued for another 10 seconds, then faded. The room settled. Pilots returned to their seats and the morning brief began, but something had changed. When Myra walked out of that ready room an hour later, pilots made space for her, nodded as she passed, spoke her call sign with a weight it hadn't carried before. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was Reaper. And now everyone knew what that meant. The days that followed were a blur. Myra flew again, returning to the rotation after her mandatory rest period, but the missions felt different now. Not harder or easier, just different. Other pilots requested to fly as her wingman. Maintenance crews went the extra mile on her jet, double-checking systems, making sure everything was perfect. Intel officers briefed her personally, making sure she had every piece of information she needed. She didn't ask for any of it. It just happened. One afternoon, she found herself in the maintenance hangar, standing beside the remains of her A-10. The aircraft had been towed inside for damage assessment, and the sight of it in daylight was sobering. The right engine was completely destroyed, the cowling peeled back like a tin can. The tail section was riddled with holes, some the size of a fist. The right aileron had been removed entirely, deemed unsalvageable. Torrance, the maintenance chief, walked up beside her, wiping grease from his hands with a stained rag. She's done, ma'am. No way we're putting her back together out here. Myra nodded slowly. I know. Torrance looked at the jet, his expression thoughtful. You know what's crazy? I've seen birds come back with worse damage and not make it 10 feet off the runway. This one brought you home from 60 miles out on one engine with no hydraulics. He shook his head. That's not luck, that's something else. Myra reached out and touched the fuselage, her palm resting against the scarred metal. She didn't quit. Even when she should have. Torrance smiled faintly. Sounds like her pilot. Myra glanced at him, then back at the aircraft. What happens to her now? We'll strip her for parts, send the rest stateside for evaluation. But honestly, he patted the fuselage. She's already done her job. She got you home, that's all that matters. Myra stood there for a long time after he left, her hand still resting on the metal, feeling the stillness of a machine that had carried her through the worst night of her life and refused to let her fall. 2 weeks later, the Silver Star arrived. The ceremony was small, held on the flight line at sunset, with the squadron gathered in formation and a handful of senior officers from the wing. Myra stood at attention in her dress blues, the wind tugging at the flag behind her, as Hayes read the citation aloud. For gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States while serving as an A-10 pilot in support of combat operations in Afghanistan. Captain Myra Kovac distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous actions on the night of September 14th, when she single-handedly provided close air support to a Marine reconnaissance element under heavy enemy fire. Despite critically low fuel, damaged aircraft systems, and overwhelming odds, Captain Kovac remained on station and delivered decisive fire that prevented the enemy from overrunning friendly forces. Her courage, skill, and unwavering commitment to the mission reflect the highest traditions of military service and bring great credit upon herself, her squadron, and the United States Air Force. Hayes pinned the medal to her chest, his hand steady, his voice quiet. Well done, Captain, Myra saluted. Thank you, sir. The formation was dismissed and pilots moved forward to congratulate her, shaking her hand, clapping her on the shoulder. The moment that stayed with her came later after the crowd had dispersed and the sun had dropped below the horizon. A young lieutenant approached, a new pilot fresh out of training, still wide-eyed and uncertain. She stopped a few feet away, hesitant. Captain Kovac, Myra turned. Yes, the lieutenant straightened. I just wanted to say, she paused, searching for the words. I've been flying for 6 months and I still don't feel like I belong here, like I'm not good enough. Myra's expression softened. And then I heard what you did, and I thought if you can do that, maybe I can figure this out too. The lieutenant's voice wavered slightly. So thank you for showing us what's possible. Myra looked at her for a long moment, seeing herself reflected in that uncertain gaze. Then she stepped forward and placed a hand on the lieutenant's shoulder. You already belong, she said quietly. You just have to believe it. The lieutenant nodded, blinking hard, and walked away. Myra stood alone on the flight line, the weight of the metal on her chest, the wind cool against her face. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Myra flew 14 more combat missions over the next 2 months, each one different, each one adding to the growing legend of the pilot who refused to quit. But she didn't think of herself that way. She was just doing the job, the same job every other pilot in the squadron was doing. The difference was that now people noticed. Intel officers sought her input during mission planning. Squadron commanders asked her opinion on tactics. Newer pilots shadowed her during briefs, absorbing every detail, every decision. She didn't seek the attention, but she didn't shy away from it either. If her experience could help someone else survive, she'd share it. One evening, she found herself in the ops center, reviewing footage from a recent mission when Captain Elias Ruiz walked in. Dagger, her wingman from that night in Kunar. He hadn't said much to her since the incident and she hadn't pushed. She figured he was processing it his own way. He pulled up a chair beside her, his expression thoughtful. You got a minute, Reaper? She paused the footage and turned toward him. Sure, what's up? Ruiz leaned back, arms crossed. I've been thinking about that night, about what you did. Myra waited. I told you to leave. I told you the Marines would have to hold until the next package, and you ignored me. His voice wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. I did, Myra said. Ruiz nodded slowly. I was wrong. If you'd listened to me, those Marines would be dead. I know that now. He met her eyes. I wanted to say I'm sorry and thank you for not listening. Myra's expression didn't change, but her voice softened. You weren't wrong, Dagger. You were trying to keep me alive. That's what wingmen do. Yeah, but you were trying to keep 8 other people alive. That's bigger. He paused. I should have trusted you. Myra shook her head. You did trust me. You let me make the call. That's all I needed. Ruiz smiled faintly. You know what they're saying about you now, right? Myra raised an eyebrow. I try not to listen. They're saying you're the best close air support pilot in theater, that if you're on station, the ground guys don't worry. Myra exhaled, shaking her head. That's too much. Maybe, but it's what they believe. Ruiz leaned forward. And honestly, after flying with you, after seeing what you did, I believe it too. Myra didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Ruiz stood, clapped her on the shoulder, and walked out. Myra turned back to the footage, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the lieutenant who had thanked her, the Marines who had sent the message, the pilots who now looked at her differently. She hadn't set out to become a symbol. She'd just done what needed to be done. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the best pilots weren't the ones who sought glory or recognition. Maybe they were the ones who just showed up, did the job, and trusted that it mattered. She closed the footage and stood, stretching her back. Outside, the sun was setting again, painting the mountains in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere out there, another mission was spinning up. Another team was calling for support. Another pilot was strapping into a cockpit, ready to answer. Myra grabbed her helmet and walked toward the flight line. The job wasn't done. It never was, and that was fine. Because as long as there were people who needed her, she'd be there, flying low, firing straight, refusing to quit. That was who she was. That was who she'd always been. Reaper. The squadron deployed home 3 months later, rotating back to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. The return was quieter than the departure, the excitement of coming home tempered by the weight of what they'd seen and done. Myra packed her gear, said her goodbyes to the ground crews in Bagram, and boarded the transport with the rest of her squadron. The flight was long and uneventful, the kind of empty hours that gave too much time to think. She sat near the back, headphones on, staring out the small window at the clouds below. She thought about the missions, the Marines, the jet that had brought her home. The silver star tucked into her deployment bag felt heavier than it should. When they landed at Davis-Monthan, the tarmac was crowded with families, signs, balloons. Pilots reunited with spouses and children, laughter and tears mixing in the warm Arizona air. Myra walked through the crowd alone, her duffel slung over one shoulder, scanning for the squadron liaison who would brief them on post-deployment procedures. She didn't have family waiting. Her parents had passed years ago, and the few relationships she tried to maintain had faded under the weight of deployments and distance. It was fine. She'd made peace with it. But as she reached the edge of the crowd, a voice called out, "Captain Kovac." She turned and saw a man in civilian clothes standing near a parked SUV. Mid-40s, graying hair, strong build. He wore a Marine Corps veteran cap and a jacket with unit patches she recognized. Beside him stood 7 other men, all in similar attire, all standing at ease with the kind of posture that never fully leaves. The man stepped forward and extended his hand. "Ma'am, I'm Gunnery Sergeant Retired Marcus Hale. Call sign Phantom 16. Myra's breath caught. She took his hand, shaking it firmly. "Gunny," Hale smiled, his eyes crinkling. "I wanted to be here when you got home. We all did." He gestured to the men behind him. "This is my team, the Marines you kept alive that night in Kunar." One by one, the Marines stepped forward, shaking her hand, introducing themselves. Corporal Jenkins, Lance Corporal Marquez, Sergeant Dennison. Each name, each face, a reminder that the mission had been real, that the choices she'd made had mattered. The last Marine, a young Lance Corporal with a scar running across his jaw, stopped in front of her and hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say except thank you. I got a daughter now, born 2 months ago. I wouldn't have been there for that if it wasn't for you." Myra's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak. Hale stepped forward again. "We wanted you to know, ma'am, that what you did that night, it's not something we're ever going to forget. We've told our families, we've told our friends, hell, we've told anyone who will listen. You're part of our story now, forever." Myra found her voice quiet but steady. You fought through it, Gunny. You and your team, I just gave you a chance. Hale shook his head. No, ma'am, you gave us everything. And we wanted to make sure you knew that. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden case. This is from all of us. Myra opened the case. Inside was a challenge coin, custom-made, with the Marine Corps emblem on one side and an engraved A10 on the other. Around the edge it read, Phantom 16, Kunar Province, September 14, never forgot. Myra stared at it, her vision blurring. Gunny, you don't have to say anything, ma'am. Just know that wherever you go, whatever you do, you've got 8 Marines who owe you their lives, and we don't forget our debts. Myra closed the case, her hands trembling slightly, and looked at the men standing before her. Warriors, survivors, brothers. Thank you, she whispered. Hale saluted. The others followed. Myra returned the salute, her hands steady, her heart full. And then they were gone, walking back to their vehicles, leaving her standing alone on the tarmac with a small wooden case and a memory that would last forever. The weeks after homecoming were strange. Myra returned to the routine of garrison life, training flights, simulator sessions, paperwork. It all felt smaller somehow, less urgent, like the volume had been turned down on everything. She went through the motions, professional and competent, but something inside her had shifted. She couldn't name it, couldn't explain it, but it was there. Other pilots noticed. During a training flight, her wingman commented on how smooth she was, how calm, even during simulated emergencies. It's like nothing rattles you, Reaper, he said over the radio. She didn't respond. What was there to say? That she'd already been rattled as hard as she could be and had come out the other side. That nothing in training could ever match the reality of flying alone over hostile mountains with a dying jet and no way out. She kept it to herself. One afternoon, she was called into the wing commander's office. Colonel Andrea Voss was a legend in the A-10 community, a veteran of Desert Storm and multiple combat deployments, known for her no-nonsense leadership and her ability to read people. Myra stood at attention in front of Voss's desk, waiting. Voss gestured to a chair. Sit, Captain, Myra sat. Voss leaned back, studying her with sharp, appraising eyes. How are you doing, Reaper? Fine, ma'am. That's not what I asked. Myra hesitated. I'm adjusting, ma'am. It's different being back. Voss nodded. It always is, especially after what you went through. She paused. I read your after-action report. I watched the gun camera footage, and I talked to Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. He thinks you're the best pilot he's ever commanded. Myra didn't know how to respond to that. Voss continued. I'm not going to blow smoke, Captain. What you did was exceptional. But I'm also not going to pretend it didn't take something out of you. Combat always does. Myra met her gaze. I'm fine, ma'am. I believe you, but I also want you to know that if you're not, there's no shame in saying so. We have resources, people who can help. I appreciate that, ma'am, but I'm good. Voss studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. All right, but I'm keeping an eye on you, Reaper, and if that changes, I expect you to tell me. Yes, ma'am. Voss's expression softened slightly. I also wanted to let you know that your Silver Star citation has been upgraded. You're being awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor device. The ceremony will be in 3 weeks. Myra blinked, surprised. Ma'am, you earned it, Captain. Don't argue. Voss stood and Myra followed. You're a credit to this wing, to this Air Force, and to every pilot who's ever strapped into a hog. Don't forget that. Myra saluted. Thank you, ma'am. As she walked out of the office, she felt the weight of it all settling on her shoulders. The medals, the recognition, the expectations. She hadn't asked for any of it, but she was carrying it now, whether she wanted to or not. Later that evening, she found herself at the base gym, running on a treadmill, trying to burn off the restless energy that had been building all day. The gym was nearly empty, just a few airmen lifting weights in the corner. She ran until her legs ached, until her lungs burned, until the noise in her head finally quieted. When she stopped, she stood there for a moment, hands on her knees, breathing hard. And then she heard a voice behind her. You run like you fly, Reaper, like something's chasing you. She turned and saw Ruiz standing near the weight rack, a towel slung over his shoulder. She straightened, wiping sweat from her face. Maybe something is. Ruiz walked over, his expression thoughtful. You know it's okay to slow down sometimes, to just be. Myra shook her head. I don't know how to do that. Yeah, Ruiz said quietly. I figured, he paused, but you should learn before it catches up with you. Myra looked at him, saw the concern in his eyes, and nodded slowly. I'll work on it. Ruiz smiled faintly. Good, because we need you around, Reaper, not just as a pilot, as a person. He walked away, leaving her standing there, alone with her thoughts. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony was held on a clear morning in late November. The Arizona sky stretched wide and blue above the parade ground. Myra stood at attention in her dress blues, the rows of ribbons on her chest catching the light, as the wing commander read the citation aloud. Behind her, the squadron stood in formation, silent and proud. When Colonel Voss pinned the medal to her uniform, Myra felt the weight of it, not just the physical medal but everything it represented. The missions, the choices, the lives saved, the jet that had refused to quit. Voss stepped back and saluted. Myra returned it, her hand crisp and steady. The formation erupted in applause, and for the first time since coming home, Myra allowed herself to feel it, not the weight, not the expectations, but the simple, undeniable truth that she had done something that mattered. After the ceremony, pilots lined up to congratulate her, shaking her hand, offering words of respect and admiration. The wing commander pulled her aside, introduced her to a visiting general who wanted to hear the story firsthand. Myra told it calmly and without embellishment, the same way she'd told it a dozen times before. But this time, when she finished, the general looked at her with something close to reverence. Captain Kovac, he said, you represent the very best of what we are. Never forget that. Myra nodded. I won't, sir. As the crowd dispersed and the day wound down, Myra found herself alone on the flight line, standing beneath the wing of an A-10. Not her old jet, that one was gone, stripped for parts and shipped stateside, but another Warthog, identical in every way that mattered. She reached up and touched the fuselage, feeling the cold metal beneath her palm. Thank you, she whispered. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the flight line, she could almost hear the jet answer back. The ceremony marked a turning point, though Myra didn't realize it at the time. In the weeks that followed, she was invited to speak at leadership courses, to brief new pilots on close air support tactics, to share her experience with audiences who hung on every word. She didn't enjoy the attention, but she understood its purpose. If her story could make someone else a better pilot, a better leader, a better warrior, then it was worth telling. One afternoon, she was asked to speak at the Air Force Weapons School, the most prestigious training program for tactical aviators. The audience was full of experienced pilots, instructors, and senior leaders, all watching her with the kind of intensity that came from people who lived and breathed air combat. Myra stood at the podium, her notes in front of her, and began. I'm not here to tell you that I'm special. I'm not. I'm here to tell you about a night when everything went wrong and I had to make choices I never thought I'd have to make. Some of them were good. Some of them I'm still not sure about, but I'm here, and 8 Marines are here, and that's what matters. She walked them through the mission, step by step, decision by decision. She didn't sugarcoat it. She talked about the fear, the doubt, the moments when she thought she wouldn't make it. She talked about the sound of the cannon going silent, the feeling of the jet shaking apart beneath her, the long glide toward a runway she couldn't see. And she talked about the choice, the one that defined everything. I could have left, she said, her voice steady. I could have followed my wingmen back to base, refueled, and let someone else handle it. That would have been the safe call, the smart call, but it wouldn't have been the right call because the Marines didn't have someone else. They had me, and I had a choice. Stay and risk everything, or leave and live with the consequences. She paused, looking out at the faces staring back at her. I stayed, not because I'm brave, not because I wanted a medal, but because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. The room was silent. Myra let the silence sit for a moment, then continued. The lesson isn't that you should take unnecessary risks. It's that you should know what you're willing to risk and why. Because when the moment comes, and it will come, you won't have time to think. You'll just act, and whatever you do, you'll have to live with it. She stepped back from the podium. That's all I've got, thank you. The applause was immediate and sustained, but Myra barely heard it. She walked off the stage, her hands trembling slightly, and found a quiet corner to collect herself. A few minutes later, one of the instructors approached, a lieutenant colonel with graying temples and a chest full of ribbons. Captain Kovac, That was one of the best briefs I've ever heard. You just taught a room full of weapons officers something they'll carry with them for the rest of their careers." Myra looked up, surprised. "I just told them what happened, sir." "No," the instructor said. "You told them why it mattered, that's the difference." He extended his hand. "Thank you." Myra shook it, nodding. As he walked away, she realized something. The story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who heard it, everyone who needed it, everyone who would carry it forward into their own moments of choice. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the best stories weren't the ones you kept to yourself. Maybe they were the ones you gave away. Over the next year, Myra continued to fly, continued to train, continued to lead. She upgraded to flight lead, then instructor pilot, mentoring the next generation of A-10 pilots with the same calm precision that had defined her combat missions. She didn't talk about the medals or the recognition unless someone asked. She didn't need to. Her reputation spoke for itself. But on quiet nights when the base had gone still and the flight line was empty, she would sometimes walk out to the jets and stand beneath their wings remembering the sound of the cannon, the voice of Phantom 16, the 8 Marines who had trusted her with their lives, the jet that had refused to quit, and she would whisper the same words she'd whispered that first night back home. "Thank you." Because in the end, that was all there was: gratitude for the chance to serve, for the privilege of the fight, for the moments that defined who she was and what she stood for. Reaper. The name still carried weight, but now it carried something else too: legacy. Years passed. Myra eventually left active duty, transitioning to the reserves and then to civilian life. She took a job as a test pilot for a defense contractor, flying experimental aircraft and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. She married, had a daughter, built a life that was quiet and full in ways she'd never imagined. But the story followed her. New pilots still heard about the captain who stayed on station alone, who fired until the gun went dry, who brought a dying jet home through sheer will. The story evolved, mythologized in some tellings, but the core remained the same. One person, one choice, 8 lives saved. Myra didn't mind, she knew the truth. And that was enough. One afternoon, nearly a decade after that night in Cunnar, she received a letter. It was from Lance Corporal Marquez, the young Marine with the scar on his jaw. Inside was a photo of him standing beside a teenage girl, both smiling, holding a sign that read, "Thank you, Reaper." The letter was short. "Ma'am, my daughter turns 14 today. Every year on her birthday, I tell her about the night you saved my life. I tell her that one person can make a difference. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to act anyway. I tell her about you. Thank you for giving me the chance to be her father. Semper Fi, Marquez." Myra sat in her kitchen, the letter in her hands, tears streaming down her face. Her daughter walked in, saw her crying, and rushed over. "Mom, what's wrong?" Myra wiped her eyes and smiled. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart, everything's right." She showed her daughter the photo, told her the story, watched as the girl's eyes went wide with wonder. "You did that, Mom?" Myra nodded. "I did." "That's amazing." Myra pulled her daughter close. "The amazing part isn't what I did, it's that I got the chance to do it. And that people like Marquez trusted me enough to try." Her daughter hugged her tight. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Myra closed her eyes, holding her daughter, feeling the warmth of the sun through the kitchen window. "I'm proud too," she whispered. The years continued to roll forward as they always do. Myra grew older, her hair streaked with gray, her hands marked by the passage of time. She retired from flying eventually, her body no longer able to handle the G-forces and the strain. But she stayed connected to the community, mentoring young pilots, speaking at events, sharing the lessons she'd learned. She became a fixture at A-10 reunions, a living link to a time when the Warthog was the backbone of close air support, when pilots flew low and slow and stayed on station until the job was done. Younger pilots would approach her, wide-eyed and respectful, asking about the mission, about the choices, about what it felt like. She always answered honestly. "It felt like the only thing I could do, and that was enough." One year at a reunion in Tucson, a young female captain approached, her uniform crisp, her expression nervous. "Ma'am, I just graduated from flight school. I'm headed to my first A-10 squadron next month." Myra smiled. Congratulations, the captain hesitated. I'm terrified, I don't know if I'm good enough. Myra looked at her, seeing herself in that uncertain gaze, and placed a hand on her shoulder. You wouldn't be here if you weren't good enough. Trust your training. Trust your instincts, and when the moment comes, trust yourself. The captain nodded, her eyes shining. Thank you, ma'am. One more thing, Myra said. The captain looked up. Don't try to be me, don't try to be anyone else, just be the best version of yourself. That's all anyone can ask. The captain saluted and Myra returned it. As the young pilot walked away, Myra felt a quiet sense of peace. The torch had been passed, the legacy would continue. And somewhere in the endless sky above the mountains and deserts and valleys where warriors still flew and fought, the spirit of the warthog lived on. Low, slow, unstoppable, just like the pilots who flew them, just like Reaper. On a warm spring evening, Myra sat on her porch, watching the sun set over the desert horizon. The sky was painted in shades of amber and violet, the kind of colors that reminded her of Afghanistan, of long missions and longer nights. Her daughter sat beside her, now a young woman in college studying aerospace engineering. They sat in comfortable silence, the way people do when words aren't necessary. After a while, her daughter spoke. "Mom, do you ever miss it, flying?" Myra thought about it, turning the question over in her mind. "Every day," she said finally. "But not the way you'd think. I don't miss the adrenaline or the danger, I miss the purpose. The feeling that what I was doing mattered." Her daughter nodded. "It did matter, you saved lives." "I did," Myra said. "But so did a lot of other people. Pilots, ground crews, medics, intel officers. It was never just me. It was all of us working together, believing in something bigger than ourselves." Her daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to do something like that, something that matters." Myra looked at her, pride swelling in her chest. "Then do it. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone to tell you you're ready. Just go out there and make it happen." Her daughter smiled. "Like you did." "Like I tried to do," Myra corrected gently. "I made mistakes, I took risks, I got lucky. But I also showed up every single time and gave it everything I had. That's all anyone can do." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, the desert cooling, the stars beginning to emerge. And in that quiet moment, Myra understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. The mission wasn't over. It never was. It lived on in the people she'd saved, in the pilots she'd mentored, in the daughter sitting beside her who wanted to make a difference. It lived on in every person who heard the story and decided to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to stand when it would have been easier to walk away. Years later, when Myra passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, the news spread quickly through the tight-knit community of A-10 pilots, past and present. Tributes poured in from around the world. Pilots who had never met her shared the story of the night she stayed on station alone. Marines who owed her their lives attended the funeral, standing at attention in their dress blues, tears streaming down weathered faces. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery, an honor reserved for those who had served with distinction. The sky was clear and bright, the kind of day that felt too beautiful for sadness. As the honor guard folded the flag and presented it to Myra's daughter, a formation of 4 A-10 Thunderbolts roared overhead, low and tight. As they passed over the gravesite, one aircraft broke formation, climbing steeply into the sky, leaving an empty space where it had been. The missing man formation. A final salute to a warrior who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. Myra's daughter stood with the folded flag in her arms, watching the jets disappear into the distance, and whispered the words her mother had taught her. "Thank you." The gathering dispersed slowly, people lingering, sharing stories, remembering. Gunnery Sergeant retired Marcus Hale stood beside the grave, his hand resting on the headstone, his voice quiet but steady. "Rest easy, Reaper. We've got the watch now." And as the sun set over Arlington, casting long shadows across the rows of white headstones, the legacy of Captain Myra Kovacs settled into the earth and the sky and the hearts of everyone who had known her story. She had been a pilot, a warrior, a leader, a mother, a mentor. But most of all, she had been someone who showed up when it mattered, who stayed when others left, who chose courage over comfort and duty over safety. And that, in the end, was everything. The story didn't end with her death. It lived on, passed down through generations of pilots who heard the tale and carried it forward, a reminder that one person in the right place at the right time with the right heart could change the world. Low, slow, unstoppable, just like the warthog, just like Reaper. Forever.